Hello, I'm Jackson Jenkins and I'm a guide at West Bank Anglers, and today we are going to be talking about some tips and techniques for some fall streamer fishing. So we'll first start off by talking about the tool of the trade here. Typically for streamer fishing, I like to use a 9-foot 6 weight or a 9-foot 7 weight. This one's a 9-foot 7 here. And during the fall, I'm typically bringing 3 lines with me. I'm bringing a floating line, a sinking line, and then more of an intermediate clear tip line. We'll start with this floating line setup first off. And I like this floating line because I feel like it allows me to kind of work that water a little bit easier from foot and keep it in the zone a little bit longer depending on what type of water I'm fishing. Like this river we have behind us here is nice, low and clear, so that floating line just limits that impression we are making on the water and provides some stealth with us. With that floating line though, I typically like to run leaders longer than 9 feet. My preferred setup is just a little short, like foot butt section of some heavier pound test. It doesn't matter, anywhere from like 15 to 25 pound mono. And then I'll run a little swivel off the top of it here and then run about 9 to 12 feet of fluorocarbon off of that. This allows me to just kind of achieve the depth I want in separating that fly line from the fly. Because in this low clear water, these fish have seen a lot of flies and we're trying to just it's more match the hatch with the streamer fishing we are trying to do in the fall. I feel like the rivers are low and clear. Our minnows and forage fish are starting to get a little bit bigger, so we're kind of fishing anywhere from that 2.5 to 4 inch range of bait fish out here. Typically I like to run some heavier stuff off of that floating line, and that just allows me to kind of keep in tension with it, and also allows me to change the depth at any given point as well. This rig is really beneficial too when you have a little bit mossier conditions as well. That weight kind of punches through. You're not fighting against that sinking line, digging into all the moss or anything. So the long leader floating line, heavy fly is very successful here in the fall. And I enjoy fishing it. It's very clunky to cast. It's not pretty, but it sure gets the job done. Now with that intermediate line, that whole line is gonna sink underneath, and it probably sinks around like 1 inch or 1.5 inches per second. So depending on how much slack you give that line is how much it's gonna sink. So say if I casted that fly on an intermediate straight out and started retrieving, I would keep the consistent depth. Now say if I casted it again and let it sit for 2-3 seconds, that line would start to be able to dig in there, and I would achieve the depth I wanted to through the line rather than the weight of the fly. We'll talk about some leader setups here. So I like running around like 6 feet of 12-pound fluorocarbon to 10-pound fluorocarbon. I really notice, water's low and clear. They're probably not looking at the leader, but it makes me feel a little more confident if I'm kind of sizing down that leader to the clarity of the water. And I find this line very useful, especially in this low clear water. If we just need to achieve a little more depth and keep that line in swinging with our rod tip so there's no hinge point. That is one downside with that floating line, that there is a big hinge point in that line when you're stripping your fly. So a scenario I'd use this in is low clear and like some smaller weightless streamers in some more shallow water. And that just allows me to kind of keep that fly in the zone the whole way through. And like good flies for that are like zoo cougars, like small little sex dungeons, anything like that. But I'm always carrying an intermediate line with me, and then a full sink line as well. So we got the full sink. I'm a big fan of the Scientific Anglers Trout Express. This is a 240 grain for my 7 weight right here, and it's around like a 20-25 foot sinking head on it. I will literally just run a straight piece of 12-pound Seagar or any 2X or 0X or 1X, and I'll just run it 6 feet long and put a little perfection loop in there just to keep a nice straight leader right there. I don't tend to really fish any tapered leaders on the streamer. We're really just trying to get that line to cut in there, and I feel like just having one diameter through helps out a lot. And definitely in more heavily pressured areas, I do think kind of moving that fly away from that sinking leader kind of gets you a little bit more bites. Now this is the go-to line if I'm ever fishing out of a boat on larger rivers or tailwaters. This is the go-to line here regardless of what I'm doing. I usually tend to lean towards the weight of my fly if I'm trying to achieve more depth on those larger tailwaters, because I really want that straight line connection to that fly. I don't want any of those hinge points in there to limit my hook set. When we're fishing these lower clear rivers, and it might be 2-3 feet average depth throughout it all, I'm really gravitating towards the sinking line for more of a swim fly bug. So weightless deer hair, more like D&D, unholy, deceivers, and just anything in that ballpark with weight, where you're actually letting the line do the work for you rather than animating the fly through stripping, where that's going to be more of the floating line, is where you're pulling that fly up, and then when you let it drop, that's where you get most of your eats on that drop. But with that sinking line, you're letting that line and the slack do all the work for you, for your fly right there. But I'm definitely gravitating towards the floating line on smaller water and the sinking line on larger water. And then that intermediate clear line is a good in between on both. It just depends on what fish, where the fish are and what they're eating on. It's like a mental checklist with water, you know? We're gonna start fast and shallow and really rip it and just kind of work our way to that deeper water, like starting high in the column and just seeing if we need to get that fly into their zone a little bit better.